Hey guys, welcome back to Games of War. Today's episode is going to be the Ultimate Rare Game and PlayStation 1 Buyer's Guide. Now for those of you that are saying, hey, what the shit? Where have you been? Where's the Xbox Buyer's Guide? I'll leave a link in the description. If you are interested in what has kept me out of the game for a couple of months, you can take a look. It's been a rough couple of months. I'm not going to lie. It's some bullshit. Life happens. So if you're interested in checking it out, go ahead. I'm not going to bog down the channel with those that don't give a shit. The Xbox Buyer's Guide was nearing completion. I had about 2 hours of footage. Everything was ready to go, almost edited. I ended up getting a new mic thanks to all you generous people on Patreon. And I wanted to kind of transfer over and upgrade the audio that I had previously done. And everything went wrong. Everything got deleted and I was heartbroken. I lost over 4 hours of footage and I could not bring myself to look at an Xbox game or console for like 2 weeks. So that video will be coming soon. Trust me, it will. I'm passionate about the Xbox. I owned one since launch and I've got a lot to say about it. So for now, I hope the PlayStation Buyer's Guide suffices and I will see you all soon with the next video. Back on track now. Thank you guys for sticking with the channel. I appreciate all of you. Please enjoy. The Sony PlayStation. Man, I gotta say, never has there been such a significant change in console generations than that occurred between the 16 and 32-bit generations. Overnight, 2D gaming was dead. Done for. When the PlayStation hit, all the rage was polygons, 3D games, 2.5D games, pre-rendered backgrounds, static backgrounds, bringing in all new types of games, all new types of gameplay, much more adult. The violence became more real. Everything on the PlayStation ushered in a new era. And I've got to say, as a lifelong Sega fan, when I saw the specs, when I saw the companies that had signed on, I saw some of the games coming out, I knew it was over for Sega and that Sony was going to take over. Nintendo had just a huge challenge on their hands, especially deciding to go with the cartridge format. They were already at a loss there because companies were jumping ship left and right. Square put Final Fantasy exclusive on the Sony machine, and I can't understate or overstate how much of a big deal that was back then to get a series like that. Sony just took control. Sega had made too many mistakes by that point with the 32X and quickly abandoning systems. It just did not sit well. Launching the Saturn early was a complete disaster. So the playing field was wide open for a brand new competitor with fresh games, fresh franchises to come in and take over, and that's exactly what Sony did. Before we get started with the games, I want to say, if you buy one peripheral for this machine, please get yourself the PS1 screen. This fits on the system so beautifully. It's a match made in heaven, and this screen looks absolutely gorgeous in motion. It kind of gives the PlayStation a bit of portability, almost feels like a handheld machine. You can play this thing in the comfort of your bed, sitting in a chair, wherever, man, and it just works perfectly. I cannot recommend the PlayStation screen enough. Quality through and through, a must-have accessory. Role-playing games have always been my favorite genre in gaming. Ever since I fell in love with Lunar, the Silver Star on Sega CD years ago, still my favorite game of all time to this day. This genre has just captivated me ever since, and the PlayStation 1 has RPGs that are near the top of the class. This was when the genre was at its peak, creativity bursting out of every seam. It's really tough to match the sheer quality and quantity of RPGs that came out on the PlayStation 1. And I'll be the first person to admit, at the time I was a Sega loyalist, a fanboy. I had my Saturn and that's all I thought I needed. Games like Albert Odyssey and Dragon Force kept me busy. I was in love with both games. A little bit later on, I was playing Shining Force 3 and Panzer Dragoon Saga. Now, the RPGs weren't plentiful on the Saturn. Shining the Holy Ark, a bunch of others I really enjoyed. I didn't think I needed a PlayStation. Now, my friends all had gone the Sony route, and they all bought the system and were all about it, and I can't really stress how important Final Fantasy VII was. When Final Fantasy VII released, RPGs were kind of catapulted from this niche genre into the limelight. It made RPGs popular. They were all the rage. So the effect of Final Fantasy VII is all of the RPGs got a ton of exposure on the PlayStation and they all knocked it out of the park. So a lot of games on the PlayStation, when you look at RPGs such as like Xenogears, games like Grandia, even games like Saga Frontier 1 and 2, Breath of Fire 3 and 4, Brave Fencer Musashi, which was kind of like PlayStation's answer to Zelda at the time. The Final Fantasy games, of course, Chrono Cross, one of my personal favorites, Vagrant Story. All these games got a lot of attention due to the success of Final Fantasy. In good form, they were all amazing games. But for this video, I'd like to dig a little bit deeper and find some of the RPGs that didn't get quite the love that they deserved, didn't really find big success. Now, Threads of Fate had the misfortune of launching sandwiched in between Legend of Mana and Chrono Cross. So unfortunately, under those two big names, this game just went largely ignored. And it's a real shame because this is a really creative, enjoyable action RPG from Squaresoft. And it's very different from a lot of the norm at the time. It features two playable characters, Rue, a swordsman, and Mint, a spellcaster. And they have wildly different stories. They play out completely different in tone to each other. Both campaigns are very enjoyable, and there's a lot going for this game that is different from what else is out there. Now, at the time, most action RPGs, or RPGs in general, the more people you kill, the more experience you get, the more you level up. In this game, there's no experience points, but how many kills you have determines how you level up as Rue, how many times. And with spells, when you're casting spells as Mint, the amount of spells you cast enables you to level up. Same thing with weapons and item upgrades. They are upgraded based on their use. The amount of uses your weapon has determines its level. The amount of spells that you cast is going to level up your spellcaster. It's really cool to see something different tried, and it works pretty well. The boss fights in this game are completely amazing. Now, granted, the action RPG gameplay, it's nothing special. It's nothing that hasn't been done before. It's just done very well in this game, and what is done exceptionally well is the different storylines and how they come together. Playing both of them, finishing them both, the New Game Plus opens up and you get the true ending. And I absolutely loved the storyline. A couple of times I found myself laughing. The script is that well done. Everything from the voice acting to the tone, completely different in both stories, but they are both very well told. All in all, I enjoyed this action RPG through and through. I don't think it gets near the praise it deserves. An amazing game, one of my favorites on the PlayStation that didn't get the love. Legend of Legai is also one of my favorites, and this has got a lot of sentimental value to it. This was back at a time I was dating this chick from high school, and I was all about this girl, man. She was gorgeous, and I was in deep, and I used to go over there a lot on the weekends and during the week and hang out, and her little sister drove me freaking crazy, man. She was like the kind of girl that got the coolest freaking presents, the best shit at Christmas, and she would not share for the life of her, man. It was when she found out that you wanted to see something or you wanted to play with something, and then she became like, no. She got a Virtual Boy for Christmas one year, and she could care less. She didn't know what it was. She's like, oh, this is cool. It sat around, and I knew I was just dreading asking, hey, can I play that? So I put it off as long as possible. I finally said, hey, can I see that Virtual Boy? And she's like, oh, this? No, I want to play it. Went, and all of a sudden she was like, such a huge Virtual Boy fan. She wanted to play it all the time, but she never could. She could never stay focused long enough. But if I wasn't playing it, she was happy. And she got this game. I remember her dad picked this game up for her, and she didn't know what RPGs were. She didn't play any RPGs. And I saw it sitting in the drawer. She made the misfortune of leaving it out in the family room. She didn't put it away in her room, so I put it in. I was playing this, and I became hooked with the battle system mainly. It was so badass. It was like a fighting game where you could kind of use all these different combos and chain these combos together. And then when you use certain combos together to discover new moves, you can add them all to your repertoire and kind of assign different combos. And the storyline was really cool. There was like this deadly miasma that was taking over the world, and it was your band of adventurers that had to go together and try to find a way to stop this miasma. And it was turning all these creatures into big monsters, and it was ravaging the land, and it was just an awesome concept. But the battle system really hooked me in this, and one day I got careless and like left it in the system, and she came home and saw that it was in there, and all of a sudden, oh, who's touching my game? And all of a sudden she took it and wouldn't let me play it. It's funny how you think back to stuff like that. The annoying little sister that would not share any of her shit, man. She didn't care about this game. As long as I wasn't playing it, she was happy. She would force herself to try, even if she wasn't interested. A few years down the road, like after we grew up a little bit, I ended up buying the Virtual Boy off her and stuff, and she was pretty cool about it. But Legend of Legai, I always remember trying to sneak it and play it, but this is an amazing RPG. I couldn't talk about role-playing games on the PlayStation and not mention probably my favorite publisher of all time, Working Designs. They did fantastic work. Some of my game-changing titles on the Sega CD that completely changed me as a gamer. That tradition continued on through the Saturn. Amazing support. After the Saturn wrapped up its short life, we got some PlayStation support, heavy. And they started off with the Lunar games, enhanced versions of the Sega CD classics of Lunar, and they went in full force on the PlayStation. Some of my favorites from them on the PlayStation: Elemental Gearbolt, Alondra, and Vanguard Bandits. Now, Elemental Gearbolt is a very unique game. It is a hybrid of shooter and RPG, and shooter in terms of like light gun shooter, like on rails, so think House of the Dead, Virtua Cop. Take that, and the setting almost reminds me of, it's got a really strong Panzer Dragoon vibe in the world and environments. Great attention to detail, a great art style, beautiful colors. The shooting action is amazing with the gun con, pinpoint accuracy. In terms of being an on-rail shooter, you've got your standard light gun tropes. You've got 3 different shots you can switch on the fly, and it doesn't have ammunition because the game runs on magic, being an RPG. So you've got your spread shot, your standard shot, and then your rapid shot. And it's all based on an element of like fire and water. Really cool stuff. I absolutely love the cinematics. I love the storyline. It's very engrossing. And the real fun in this game comes from the challenge, being able to free all these fairies that are caged up and just shooting everything in your path. After each level, you're given a choice whether to spend your rewards on experience points to level up and become stronger, or points. Overall, just a fantastic mashup. I haven't seen anything quite like it to this day. It still stands very strong. Elemental Gearbolt is amazing, and there was a really cool contest back at E3. Working Designs did like a really limited run of I think it was gold, a gun con, like a gold briefcase and a copy of the game, and they gave it away to lucky winners, and man, they're super sought after for Working Designs collectors. So little made, but they were so awesome. I would have loved to get my hands on one of those back in the day. A great package, a great game. Alondra made a pretty big mark on the PlayStation for action RPGs back in the day. This game was quality through and through. This was the first game that I had played from Working Designs on the PlayStation, and I was completely blown away. The storyline was completely engrossing. You play as Alondra, who's like an elf, and he is a dream walker. He discovers that after being shipwrecked on this island. And this island is full of townspeople that are having like really bad nightmares, and as soon as your ship crashes and you wash up on shore, some really horrible shit starts happening in the town, and the townspeople start blaming Alondra for it. And the storyline picks up. Alondra starts to travel into dreams, and when you go into these NPCs' dreams, their dream worlds are kind of shaped by their personality and how they are as people. So it's going to be custom tailored to these individuals' thoughts and the way they conduct themselves, and it's just a brilliant mechanic. Some really thoughtful and inventive puzzles, very challenging. Alondra is a very challenging game. I was also surprised by just how dark the story became as the game went on, dealing with a lot of things that Working Designs titles usually don't dive into. I mean, a lot of Working Designs localizations are really funny, lots of pop culture references, very witty dialogue. This one dealt with like death and depression and nightmares, and it was overall a kind of a dark story, but I loved every minute of it. Alondra is fantastic, truly. Vanguard Bandits is a title that I didn't think I would end up liking as much as I did, because on face value, the graphics are pretty dated in this. The battles are painfully slow and sometimes monotonous. The cool aspect is you battle in these giant machines. They're called attacks, ATACs, and they are really cool to control on the battlefield. But in terms of the story, it's kind of a formulaic, great warring nations all opposing each other, 8 different nations all vying for control, and it's your character whose name is Bastion, and it focuses on Bastion's struggle to unite these kingdoms under peace. And the magic, though, comes from, once again, Working Designs digging down deep, and the localization, the dialogue, and the banter in between characters is just so memorable and so well done. You can't help but fall in love with the story and characters, and really look forward to, in between battles, that dialogue and that interaction. It really keeps the game going. It's something special. They just had a gift for scripts, localization, and making dialogue flow seamlessly and feel natural, giving you a great detail on the characters, who they are as people, and everything just fits together perfectly, because there's no overworld map, there's no exploration. It's basically go to town, predetermined, take care of all your buying and selling new equipment, getting yourself ready for battle, some story bits, and then into battle. There's no exploration after that. Right back into it, back to the town, sell off your old gear, get new gear, and battle again. It's the story, characters, and presentation in terms of how the characters interact with each other that makes this game special. Vanguard Bandits really is a good game for strategy RPG fans. Dragon Valor is another game on the PlayStation that I really fell in love with. Now, it's not an RPG per se, but more along the lines of an action game that follows like an RPG format when it comes to the story and some of the gameplay elements. Now, you play as Clovis, who has lost a sister. She's been killed by a dragon. This causes you to go on a quest for revenge and slay these dragons. And there's a long history of Dragon Valors and dragons and the fighting between them. And what's cool about this game is all of the cool different moves you can do. There's a really nice combat system in this where you can kind of jump into the air, you kind of thrust downwards and you come down. You can do these amazing defensive rolls and all kinds of offensive moves. I was really surprised by the amount of useful moves there are in this game. Swordplay is a lot of fun. Graphics are pretty good for the time. I like the music, the cinematics and story are really good. I've always been a sucker for a good generational game, and that's exactly what Dragon Valor is. The amazing part of this game is that throughout certain points in the game, you're going to find yourself in situations where you can choose to save someone or let them die. And it is these choices mixed with different characters that are going to affect your decisions on who you become involved with romantically, and then eventually have children, and then play as your offspring as the game continues on. Always love this element. I think in this game it's alive and well. It's really cool to see the personality traits of the wife that you've chosen, and then Clovis wear off into your offspring, continue the game playing as your children. Love generational games. Dragon Valor does it right. Not necessarily an RPG, but a great game with a great battle system from Namco. Absolutely love Dragon Valor. Aside from RPGs, my other favorite genre would have to be survival horror, horror games, or scary games. Now, the PlayStation is the system that brought that subgenre to the forefront. Now, sure, I had played horror games before the PlayStation. I remember Alone in the Dark on the 3DO, but this is the machine that really brought everything to the mainstream. Resident Evil, I look at as my first true definitive survival horror experience. Never before had I seen such detail and such realism. It was a scary game. It also brought that campy element that I loved from horror movies. And the pre-rendered backgrounds were the first of its kind for me. I'd never seen backgrounds such detail. Now, you couldn't control the camera, you couldn't rotate it, but what it did was allow them to focus on static pre-rendered images for maximum detail, and the tank controls that we all love so much. So Resident Evil is definitely credited for me for starting my love for the horror games. And I gotta say, Capcom also brought another series that I absolutely love that isn't going to this day still like Resident Evil is. Still going strong, Resident Evil, million sellers. Dino Crisis seem to be forgotten, and it's a shame because the first Dino Crisis, it took the Resident Evil formula down to a T, swapped out the zombies with dinosaurs, and it was a great game. It was a great fit. I had a lot of fun playing it. It was very tense. Just an amazing game. Now, the second one kind of ditched the survival horror, went more for a straight up action game. And it was still a lot of fun, but I missed the survival horror element from the first Dino Crisis. Everybody knows Resident Evil. Many people know Dino Crisis, but it's definitely not in the same league as Resident Evil in terms of awareness. But I would love to see this series come back. The last time I played a Dino Crisis game was way back on the Xbox, Dino Crisis 3. So come on, Capcom, bring this amazing series back. Also, probably my favorite horror series of all time, Silent Hill, was born on the PlayStation. Now, this took a different approach than Resident Evil. It didn't have the excessive gore, the zombies, the jump scares, and the corny, hammy dialogue. This had much more of a serious psychological approach. The scares you didn't see, they were in the dark or the fog, and it was a much more serious in tone story and just a disturbing game. Silent Hill is amazing, definitely a must-own, but everybody knows the big three, the Resident Evil, the Silent Hill, and to a lesser extent the Fatal Frame. But some of the favorite experiences I found in terms of horror on PlayStation, you have to check a little bit below the surface. Many people have heard of the Clock Tower series. It just hasn't caught on to that big mainstream appeal, and I think that partly is in fact due to it's a point-and-click series, and that turns a lot of people off. People that are weaned on the action back then with Resident Evil, the gunplay, the full control, are going to be turned off by a game that is basically moving a cursor around the screen and pointing and clicking. But the magic in this game comes in the form of an unexplored element of horror, and that is being chased, man. I can't really convey how much fear comes into being chased. I don't know if anybody of you have ever been actually running for your life while some crazy son of a bitch wielding a giant pair of scissors is coming after you trying to kill you. I myself haven't either, but that would be pretty damn scary, and that's what these games focus on, is the element of fear, being chased, and then hiding. An awesome hiding mechanic where you can kind of dip under a bed or jump into a closet and hide, and the guy's going to come in the room, he's going to be opening doors looking for you, searching under the bed. It's just a pretty on-edge experience, and it really translates well to these games. Now, the first game is focused on the Scissor Man, which is a brilliant villain. I think he was very well done. I think, in my opinion, he could have been one of the all-time horror greats like Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers. He's just that cool of a character. And the first game has you playing as a character who is kind of digging into the backstory of Scissor Man, who has now appeared, because this is the second game. The first game came out on the Super Famicom a year earlier. The guy that made the game didn't have any intentions of making another one. He was really struck by Resident Evil and he was enamored with it and thought he could apply that same bump up in graphics and technology to Clock Tower. So this came out a year later. A year has passed since the Scissor Man went on his killing spree. While doing some research, he reappears, so you're being chased by this crazy bastard, all the while trying to research what the hell's going on. The game features a prologue to where the actions you perform are going to determine your main character in the main game, and there's all different kinds of situations where based on your choices, the scenarios play out different, multiple endings. Clock Tower definitely deserves much more recognition. I absolutely love the game. Clock Tower 2 was not as well received as the first game in this series. It got pretty bad reviews and I heard a lot of bad things being said about it when it was released at the time. I think over time it's become more appreciated. This deals with a character named Alyssa who suffers from multiple personality disorder, and one of her alter egos is Mr. Bates. Now she has been able to keep this destructive alter ego under control in the form of this amulet that she wears. Now during the gameplay, you're able to set this amulet on certain objects, set it in certain things of the environment, and it allows Mr. Bates to take over your psyche, and you are able to solve certain puzzles playing as Mr. Bates. And certain puzzles have to be solved as Mr. Bates and certain have to be Alyssa, so there's a really cool dynamic switching going on with the alter egos. And I think it's really cool that the game focuses so strongly on personalities and the differences between the two personalities all living inside one person. A really fascinating topic, people that suffer from this kind of disease. I've got to say Clock Tower, and also continuing into Clock Tower 3, features some of the most brutal depictions of murder. I absolutely amazed by the sheer carnage that went under the radar just because the series was lesser known than some of the other big horror greats. And not to mention Clock Tower, the existence of this series kind of spawned into a spin-off of one of my favorite games ever, and that's Haunting Ground. Another game that got shit on upon release, horrible reviews, but people have really come around, and this uses the same kind of running and hiding mechanic while a big killer is after you and chases you. Just amazing games. The Clock Tower is definitely something different. Point and click fans or fans of horror, definitely take a look at the Clock Tower series. Koudelka is another one of my favorite horror games on the PlayStation, and that was only real recently in the past couple years when I had finished the Shadow Hearts games, and I realized that the Shadow Hearts games took place in the same universe as Koudelka. This was their previous game. So characters and locations in this series of games are from Koudelka, as it takes place in the same universe. And what Koudelka is a mashup of strategy RPG in the battle system and then survival horror. And it is very dark, it's very cryptic, it's very, like, feelings of isolation and dread run about in this game. It takes place in a very dark old monastery that has like this haunted past, this horrible past, and you're playing as multiple characters in this, and they all kind of have different stories that kind of intertwine. And some of the backstory in this monastery is a young girl named Charlotte who was trapped in there since birth, and she was executed at a very young age. There was also a prison in this thing where heretics were executed. This dark past is kind of explored and told throughout the perspective of these three characters. A tragically dark game, amazing atmosphere and universe. Koudelka is definitely one of my favorites. If you're going to play Koudelka, please, in the opening few hours, have some patience with the strategy RPG influenced battle system. It's very slow, it can be very clunky at times, and it's definitely, for me, the low point. But there's really cool spells, but just have some patience because it's going to be a little slow moving in those early battles. Nightmare Creatures is one of my favorite action games on the PlayStation 1, and I include this in the horror section because it definitely has a action battle system that I thought was awesome, very combo heavy, wrapped around a very strong, like, supernatural, dark, and horror theme. One of these brotherhoods back in the early days in London were obsessed with kind of trying to find an elixir that would turn them into a god and take over the world, like Satan worshipping shit going on. And the guy that actually turned on his own cult and burnt the place down had a journal that was kind of found by another guy years later, and another group is trying to pick up essentially where this group left off before their place burned down. And so it's up to you or this girl Nadia to take this cult on head on and fight some of these beasts that are starting to be transformed due to this elixir. And the locations are really atmospheric, it's very dark, but the thing I enjoyed so much is the awesome combo heavy battle system, running around and kicking ass. The camera and controls take a little bit of time getting used to. This is before the days of analog smooth controls, so pressing the D-pad kind of shifts the whole screen along with the character, so it's kind of cumbersome, but I absolutely loved the battle system in this. There was a sequel, I have it on Dreamcast. It didn't quite match up as good as the original in the kind of free-flowing combat. There is a 64 port that fixes some of the graphical problems of this, but I originally played it on PlayStation, and Nightmare Creatures is a fantastic action game set in a horror backdrop. I love this one. Now, if you're a fan of shoot 'em ups, you're going to find a lot to love on the PlayStation 1. I, for one, am a huge fan of the RType series of games. We've got a couple of great titles here. RTypes is actually a collection of RType and the second game in the series. It's really cool to go back and see the origins of the Bito and to play the first game in the series and second and see all of the great ideas already in place, and to play later entries and just see how much the series has grown. Always love going back to the early entries in the series, and RTypes gives you that opportunity. This is a game changer here. RType Delta blew everyone away when it came out in the late 90s. This was the first game in the series to feature kind of a polygon 2.5D 3D appearance. Graphics were absolutely amazing for the time. This is the first game to feature multiple ships to choose from. The Force makes its return. I absolutely love the gameplay hook in RType series of games. You have what is called a Force, and it's like a orb that kind of attached to the front or the back of your ship. You can shoot it out to kind of attack enemies, collect power-ups. It's just an amazing gameplay mechanic that works. It can also function as a shield. Some amazing bosses in RType Delta. Once again, the graphics are just amazing. The music is great. I'm such a huge fan of this series. I love the RType Final on the PS2, and RType Delta is one of my favorites of all time. Just an amazing shooter on the PS1, and it's got its place in history. It's definitely a must-own. Aside from Einhander, my favorite shooter on the PlayStation is easily Vanguard, and this is kind of Sony's answer to Star Fox. So it is a shooter that is kind of on rails. You're given some limited room to fly and some freedom of movement, but overall, you're stuck on a path. But what makes this game really special is just how good the level designs are. They are creative. They're all varied from each other. You've got beautiful, like, marshy swampland areas. You've got a level that resembles Greece. Now, the story in this game is, nothing to write home about, but I found it interesting due to the fact that it takes place on Mars. I'm fascinated with Mars, so any game that takes place on Mars is cool in my book. The Earth has been kind of destroyed, a large portion of it wiped out due to some cataclysmic explosion, forcing life on Mars. Problem is, there's already a large faction on Mars, already in control of a lot of the planet, and this faction is hell-bent on destroying Mars and the universe, and it's up to Team Vanguard to stop this group on Mars. And the action is fast, furious, the graphics are amazing, they look great, and this also combines kind of like a Resident Evil-ish kind of game where you're going to be in your space station and you're going to be moving around these environments pre-rendered, just like Resident Evil, the tank controls and all. And in between missions, you're going to be exploring your space station. It's where you're going to get story bits, story information, mission briefings, things like that. It's not an incredibly deep edition, but it's there and it's pretty cool. Gives you a little bit of break from the shooting action and kind of makes it a cohesive package. So there's the Resident Evil like exploring around the space station. There's the amazing shooting gameplay, very much like Star Fox, and there's also branching paths in the levels. Now it ultimately leads to the same place, but it gives you different routes and it keeps things fresh for multiple playthroughs. And one of the things that stood out to me was the intensity of the levels. I remember one level you're going to be shooting, you're kind of flying over an ocean, and these bombs start going off, and all of a sudden you make a split decision to kind of dive bomb below into the ocean, and then the whole enemy set changes up. You're going to be flying through the ocean at top speed, shooting all kinds of like water-based enemies. Just a brilliant addition. The graphical diversity is amazing in Vanguard, and I absolutely just love the gameplay. It's not a long game by any means, 3-4 hours tops, but what's there is great. Also some occasional third-person vehicle sections that help break up the shooting action. Vanguard I've seen kind of climb in price lately, so if you're after a copy, I would definitely suggest picking it up before it goes up any higher. Hopefully you can find it maybe at a flea market. It's still on the cheap, but an amazing shooter. Definitely sits next to Einhander as one of my favorite shooters on the console. Vanguard is great. Now, back when I owned a Genesis, one of my favorite franchises of shoot 'em ups was the Thunder Force series. I absolutely loved the bosses, the stages, the weapons, the power-ups, music, everything about these games was top-notch. So I was really disappointed when the Thunder Force 5 that was released in Japan at first exclusively for the Sega Saturn didn't come here to the States. A few years later we got a port on the PlayStation, Thunder Force 5, in the form of Thunder Force 5 Perfect System, so it adds that little subtitle. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite as good as its Saturn counterpart. It's missing some effects, and overall it's just not quite as good. I wasn't able to play the Saturn version until years later when I started importing games and it became an option. But you know what, the PlayStation Thunder Force 5 is still a really respectable game. It looks amazing, and it's very cool that Working Designs back then created this label here. It's called Spaz, and they created this label solely with the task of publishing all their shooters. All the shoot 'em ups would come out under the Working Designs Spaz label. So Thunder Force 5 didn't disappoint. I didn't know what to expect in terms of the differences, but I guess ignorance is bliss, because at the time I had never played the Saturn version, but it was great to see one of my favorite series from the Genesis continue on. Thunder Force 5 is an amazing game with great graphics, awesome power-ups. It continues the series tradition in fine form on the PlayStation, an amazing shoot 'em up. One of my favorite shooters on the Sega Saturn was Galactic Attack, and back then I had no idea that this was part of a series that had been released in the arcades. Galactic Attack was a new name given to the Sega Saturn home version, but the series also contained games such as Ray Storm and Ray Crisis, and these are amazing shoot 'em ups. They are very graphically sprite heavy, they look amazing, the power-up system is just intense. You can shoot things on the ground, in the air. Great lock-on system. These are once again done by Working Designs Spaz label. I am a huge fan of what Taito accomplished back in the arcades, and these games are intense shoot 'em up action. The PlayStation ports are great. They are for fans of shooters. Definitely can't go wrong with these two games. They are amazing. Out of all the PlayStation shoot 'em ups, the one that really surprised me the most and really came out of nowhere for me personally was Squaresoft's Einhander. Now, you gotta remember, at the time, Squaresoft was pumping out AAA RPG after AAA RPG. They were on fire. Valkyrie Profile, Xenogears, Vagrant Story, not to mention a little game called Final Fantasy VII that just completely changed the world. Einhander was a shooter from those guys, and no one expected it, and it was damn good. I read somewhere at the time that they used like some of their spells and techniques that they used for making all these awesome spells for Final Fantasy and some of the explosions in Einhander. And I can definitely see some graphical similarities in some of the effects, but that's where the similarities end. This is an amazing shooter. I love the gameplay mechanic of picking up some of the guns off of the downed enemies. You can then use the arm on the ship to attach these guns to your ship and kind of swap them around for different combinations. Find the one that works right for you. The shooting action is intense. The graphics kind of use that 2.5D to great effect. It looks amazing. With shooters in general, back to the early days of my gaming, I would always just pop in a shoot 'em up, skip through all the stuff, start up, shoot everything on screen, beat the boss, rinse, repeat till the game was over. I never really stopped to pay attention that a lot of these companies with these shooters have set up a pretty elaborate story and a backstory in the world, and I never really took into consideration that. And I remember getting burned out when I was younger on the shooters because I thought, oh, they're all the same, it's just different, you know, slightly different things. But I went in and read the backstory for Einhander in the manual and really absorbed all the information I could, and come to find out, you're in this war between the moon and the earth, and it happened a few years back, and the Earth was left for ravaged with minimal resources, and the moon was struggling for resources, and that war has been carried on and now into the second war between the Earth and the moon. So that's the question I pose to you with shooters. Do you guys actually dig back into the story? Because for me, I found it really gives me context into why I'm fighting where I'm at. It explains why I'm in this certain environment. It explains who I'm fighting for and who I'm fighting against, and it just really gave the game a lot more perspective for me, and I found it wasn't so mindless anymore when you know what you're doing and you understanding of what's going on. I opened up a whole new door for me with shooters personally. Love the story in this, love the game. Einhander is highly recommended. One of the more exciting aspects of the PlayStation when it came out was all of the new gameplay styles that were emerging due to the more powerful hardware. We were starting to see games that were in 3D. We were starting to see full 3D controls, 2.5D games, the fixed perspectives, different kind of graphical styles like claymation and pre-rendered. Everything was just a new frontier. Everything was brand new, it felt fresh. And one of my favorite games on the Genesis was Strider, which is a damn near close to arcade perfect port. Just great arcade action playing a Strider hero. Absolutely fell in love with this game as a kid. It was very expensive. I remember buying it. It was the first 8 meg game, and it was like 80 bucks, and I begged my dad to get it for me, and he bought it, and I was blown away. I was so excited to get a home port of the arcade Strider 2 on the PlayStation. This is 2.5D gaming at its finest. All the different shifting camera angles are really a sight to behold. This blew me away back in the day. And Capcom, leave it to Capcom. Just recently we got the misspelling of Resident Evil Revelations on the 3DS. Well, they pulled a pretty big blunder on this one too. So this comes with 2 discs. It comes with Strider 2 and also an arcade perfect port of Strider 1. However, Capcom printed the first one on disc 2, and these, they screwed the discs up basically in the production run. So I popped in my shiny new copy of the Strider 2 disc, and I was greeted to the original Strider. So I popped in the other one and thankfully was able to play the game. But what a blunder. How did something like that get past that big of a team and go into full production? But whatever the case may be, the Grandmaster returns, so does Strider to put an end to his evil plans. This is the same amazing action you remember from the original Strider. Everything looks amazing. 2.5D graphics are on full display, showing the new hardware, what it's capable of, the twists and turns, and the 3D effect. An amazing game. Strider 2 is great. Skull Monkeys is actually a sequel to the PC hit point-and-click game The Netherhood, and it starred an evil villain Clog who has been banished from the Netherhood, and he is now on a new planet, and he is using that planet to kind of build this evil engine number 9 and destroy the world. Now when Clog arrived on this new planet, it was inhabited by Skull Monkeys, and he has declared himself the leader of the Skull Monkeys. Clayman, who has been kidnapped and taken to this planet to stop the evil Clog, is now on the planet and is in charge of taking down this evil mastermind. And what this game does is ditch the point and click in more favor of a traditional platformer. It is difficult, and there's a lot of trial and error going on in this, but at the time I was so blown away by these clay graphics, and everything looked so cool, and such a original graphical look and diversity of the levels just completely blew me away. It's a lot of fun. The gameplay is rock solid, controls are tight. It's a lot of fun to play to this day. It's going to take a certain kind of gamer with some patience. There's a lot of levels, but a lot of humor. I believe the team that worked on Earthworm Jim, big majority of that team is behind the development of Skull Monkeys, so expect that same kind of humor. Great demonstration of a brand new system and its capabilities. Heart of Darkness is also a pretty groundbreaking game in terms of its visual style. Everything looks so good. It stars a boy named Andy and his dog who's kind of disappeared in a solar eclipse. I remember the story being really out there, but the way it all comes together is that these cutscenes and the way it's told and these likable characters that end up helping you out and teaching you new moves, it's just all so personable. You can't help but fall in love with the characters and the creatures. Overall, a very charming game, but overall, once again, suffering from some trial and error elements. Very difficult, and sometimes the controls can be a little tricky getting a handle of. It was developed by the same people that did the Out of This World games, so very forward-thinking ideas and new concepts in Heart of Darkness. This is a great game, very difficult, but I look at both of these games in the same light as it was something fresh and new. Controls be damned, because it was definitely tricky getting a handle on both of these games, but they offer a lot of fun. They've all got their own personality, great senses of humor in both, and I just enjoyed them immensely. When it comes down to 2.5D and how much the graphical style enhanced certain games, I can think of no better examples than the Tomba series and Klonoa. These were bright, they were colorful, and by the end of the 16-bit era, we had become so crowded, so overblown with these kind of Me Too wannabe mascot platform games. After the success of Sonic and Mario, everyone wanted to have a successful character and try to milk it for all it was worth. Many failed, it started to get bloated and overcrowded, so it was nice to go back and focus on gameplay. These games were amazing for the time, and they still hold up well to this day. Tomba, a young wild boy who's trying to find his grandpa's stolen bangle. You're on an island full of evil pigs, and there's so many awesome side quests and different gameplay variations. A colorful series, great games indeed. Klonoa is another one, playing through the visions, which are the name for the levels. The 2.5D lends itself so well, the graphics are so charming. Klonoa as a character is amazing. He's got his air shot where you can kind of take enemies and double jump off of them or use them to throw them across the screen. The shifting perspectives work beautifully, and I gotta say the sequel on the PS2 is such an underrated game. I'd love to see Klonoa make a comeback. I enjoyed its platformers in the GBA as well, but I always loved the original and the Wii remake. Just amazing games. I'd love to see either one of these games come back. Sadly, Whoopee Camp closed their doors after the release of the second Tomba. Namco's got no excuse. I'd love to see Klonoa make a return. These are amazing 2.5D platformers on the PlayStation, and they are a great demonstration of a brand new graphical style that really worked well. Other than Namco's Treasures of the Deep. And I've got to say openly that there are not enough underwater exploration games, and that's exactly what this game is, an action adventure set underneath the ocean. For the time, the graphics were amazing, very well done. The effects were great. You actually felt like you were underwater. It had a certain hint of claustrophobia and a tenseness to it, That graphical effect mixed with the atmosphere just created a really nice tension. I liked a lot of the elements, like if a shark were to get to you when you were outside of a submersible and bit you and you were bleeding, that the blood would stay in the water and the other sharks would sense it and more would come after you. That was a really nice touch of realism. I enjoyed the game's varied missions, 14 in all I think, and it takes place in like places like the Great Barrier Reef. You've got missions in the Bermuda Triangle, Antarctica, the Aztec ruins. Just a great sense of mystery, and the unexplored depths of the oceans are a great backdrop to watch this game unfold. The story's not the high point, I'll be honest with you guys. Jack Runyon is your character. He's kind of an ex-CIA guy, and he is now working for a new organization, taking on these different missions, exploring sunken ships, finding treasure, sunken airplanes. It's just a great game. I gotta say, Namco did a fantastic job. Tommy Tallarico, who did such amazing work on some of my favorite Sega CD games soundtracks, does an amazing soundtrack here that complements the action very well. Like I said, the world needs more underwater exploration games. This does it right. There hasn't been another game quite like it since. I really enjoy Treasures of the Deep, still to this day. I think it holds up very well. The controls, being able to purchase different vehicles by collecting gold throughout the missions, buying new submersibles, new subs. It's a lot of fun. The game is just very well made, and I still think it's very well worth your time. Treasures of the Deep is highly recommended. The arcade racer genre is alive and well on the PlayStation, and before we get into some of the gems that are hidden beneath the surface, I gotta call out one of the biggest franchises on the system and one of my favorites, Jet Moto. This was a game that kind of pushed the system early on in its life. The first Jet Moto, I'd never seen anything like it. These huge levels. You're on these kind of hovercrafts, but they're almost like sit-down jet skis, and you're racing over water and land, and you're racing over huge jumps, and you've got like a tractor beam that helps you take tight corners. This is an amazing series, pretty well known, so if you haven't checked out Jet Moto, definitely do, but it definitely is one of the more well-known racing game series, and it's fantastic. But if you dig down just a little deeper, you're going to find an excellent series in the form of Roll Cage. Now, what I love about the Roll Cage games is that you are playing in vehicles with oversized tires, which means they can kind of somersault over and race upside down, and the levels kind of go in spheres at points, and you can kind of drive on the ceilings, and it makes for a great gameplay mechanic. Controls are spot on, the levels take full advantage of this mechanic, and I think that this is one of the more fun arcade racers to come out in quite some time. Now, they were working on an update to this. There was like a PlayStation 4 game. I think the PC version is either out or the beta is out, or there's a version of it out. It's called Grip, and it was kind of like the developers getting back and doing another Roll Cage game, which I think they tried to do a Kickstarter and it failed. So that was their attempt, but I'm glad to see that there's still love out there for this series, because I think as an arcade racer, this is near the top of the class. The controls are spot on, the visuals are amazing, and I absolutely love the arcade mechanic of being able to race upside down and do 360 and watch your car tumble over and land on its wheels and peel out. It's just an amazing racing game series. The sense of speed is there, excellent music, great levels and track design. Just an amazing series. If you like arcade racers with a little twist, no pun intended, definitely check out the Roll Cage series, some of my favorites. Another racing game that just does not get the love it deserves. Now, if you know Micro Machines, that's a racing series that gets all the love when it comes to little mini cars or little kind of like RC cars. It's all Micro Machines. However, take a little look deeper and you will find Circuit Breakers that is superior in every way to Micro Machines racing games. Whether you're racing as a little RC car or a boat, or playing the game's amazing multiplayer modes, you're going to find Circuit Breakers to be a very quality, well-made game. The track design is the highlight here. Racing up huge hills, down Mayan palaces, you're racing in the desert. Amazing varied track design, great vehicles, great controls. The highlight being the multiplayer. The graphics for the time were absolutely phenomenal. The track design is second to none. Spot on controls, great sense of speed. Everything that represents kind of like a Micro Machines-ish kind of racing game that you know about if you've played. Definitely check out Circuit Breakers, because it does it all and it does it better in my opinion. This is a fantastic game that is not to be missed for fans of arcade racers. Just an amazing game. Another really cool, interesting game is Scars. It's kind of a racing game where your cars and vehicles are based on animals, and they've got really cool levels, they've got different abilities, and they've got different power-ups, and it's just a really cool arcade racer that's got a great power slide mechanic, and it's got great weapons, great graphics for the time. track design being the highlight for me in this point, and especially the vehicles. Based in Animals is a really cool concept. I think it works well. Another great arcade racer on the PlayStation. Definitely check out Scars. If you like kart racers, you definitely have to show some love to Moto Grand Prix. This uses a very bright, colorful, cartoony style of graphics, and I love the physics of the cars. When they go around the corners, they kind of bend and deform and stretch and kind of form to the corners as you're flying around. I love the arcade controls, great characters, a lot of personality to each character. They could have had a cartoon based on any one of these and been fine. I love the controls, love the animation, the weapons, everything comes together to make a fantastic kart racer that definitely needs some more love. And we can close out the racing games by talking about a real turd of a game. Rock and Roll Racing is one of my favorites ever on the original Super Nintendo, and this was kind of the sequel, follow-up, Red Asphalt. And for whatever reason, man, they really screwed this up. It retained nothing of the original game and what made it great. A really big disappointment. So for all the positive things that I say and all the great talk I talk about games, I like to throw a turd in there every once in a while, and that turd is definitely Red Asphalt. Avoid at all costs. In my opinion, I thought it was garbage. Now, as a transition away from racing games, I gotta mention Critical Depth. Now, this isn't a racing game by any means, but it is an entry in the car combat genre. Well, kind of sub-combat, but Single Track created a new genre of gameplay on the PlayStation, and that was Twisted Metal. That was the car combat genre. Being able to cruise around semi-open environments and just shoot, destroy, maim other opponents. Multiplayer was excellent. It was a really fun time. The highlight being Twisted Metal 2. Sometime after that, I guess they sold the rights to Sony, and the studio that did Twisted Metal 3, 4, and Small Brawl, I believe it was 989 Studios, it just didn't have the same magic as Twisted Metal 1 and 2. The original developers went on to make their own games. Rogue Trip was one of them, and I just have a soft spot for Critical Depth. Some people like it, some people don't, but I think it's an amazing game. Take the Twisted Metal formula and just put it under the ocean, and you've got Critical Depth. So you've got, in place of cars, you've got cool subs like Lockjaw, you've got, what was the Dolphin? The Dolphin was always my favorite, the CIA, all these badass underwater subs, and it's got the same formula as Twisted Metal with some differences. You can collect orbs, and every time you collect an orb, the computer-controlled allies are on your ass, man. They want those first. Collect the 4 orbs, move on to the next stage. All the underwater stages look pretty good. I love these special weapons. I love the design of the different ships and stuff. People kind of ragged on that, said it was generic and there wasn't much difference, but if you like Twisted Metal, definitely give Critical Depth a try. I don't think this game got the love it deserved. The developers of the original Twisted Metal games making an underwater car combat game, sign me up please. Critical Depth is a really good game. I want to thank you guys for checking out my PlayStation Buyer's Guide. If you stuck through the whole thing, you're a trooper, I assure you. If I've missed any games that you guys have favorites of, or if you have an RPG series that I missed, or a game, tell me in the comments. Let's get some good discussion going. Let's talk about the PlayStation. Let's celebrate this thing. I'd love to do a part 2 because there's a lot of games that I had to leave out due to time constraints. So as always, I want to thank you guys for watching. I love all of you, and Games of War is nothing without you.